morning. How y'all doing? Good? Hanging in there? Well, before we jump into talking a little bit about criminal justice, I thought I would just share a bit of my own story of how I ended up doing this. I'm betting a good number of you in here are planning to go to college, maybe trying to think about what you want to do with your life and your career. And so when I talk to students, I like to share a little bit about the road and path God put me on to ending up working in this area that I never imagined. When I was in high school and just starting college at Colorado State, I actually thought I wanted to go pre-med, be a doctor. Anyone thinking that in here? A few folks? All right, then I started, biology, chemistry, my freshman year of college, and I realized I don't really like science, and I'm not that good at it. And so I thought maybe it's about time to rethink this. I came back for a summer after college to work an internship, and my mom was a social worker. She worked for an adoption agency, and I found an agency called the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute. And they actually serve members of Congress. I was raised just outside Washington, D.C., so we had easy access to the Capitol. And I started working for that institute and realized that I really wanted to work in the field of child welfare and foster care. And I just loved the concept of being able to not just affect one person or work on one case, but the idea that I could actually affect a broad swath of people by changing policy and law. And so while in college, I started pursuing a dual degree in both social work as well as pre-law. Enjoyed those classes. I actually studied abroad for a semester. I highly recommend if you get the opportunity to do that. I was in West Africa and I lived with a host family. Had a really amazing experience there. And I decided I wanted to pursue law school and studied for my LSAT after finishing my undergrad. But I wanted to spend a year abroad, go back to Africa, and spend some time being in orphanages. And so I actually applied to work with a nonprofit that taught English at the University of Djibouti. Anyone even heard of the country of Djibouti? All right, people know their geography here. I love it. So I actually spent a whole year in the tiny country of Djibouti, French speaking. I had always tried to work on my French. Senegal, where I studied abroad, also speaks French, but I had an American roommate with my host family who was much better at speaking it than me, so I'd always default to, well, Julia will tell you what I mean. And so living in Djibouti really forced me to learn a little bit more of the language. The country is also 99% Muslim. So it put me in relationship with people who believed quite differently than me and gave me the opportunity to have conversations that I probably would never have had living in the States. It was a real year of challenge, teaching English, but then in all my free time, I would spend it in orphanages. And I set up a program for a government-run girls' orphanage. Some of the girls were about your age, and I would teach them athletics, which was really more like mass chaos with a ball, but it was pretty fun getting to know them. And there was also an infant and toddler orphanage where I would go and just spend time holding the kids, helping feed, change, all of that. And my passion just grew deeper for foster care and adoption and the need for every child to find a permanent home. So fast forward, I finished that year abroad. I get accepted to the Antonin Scalia Law School, which is in just outside DC in Virginia. Come back, start my first year of law school, and I'm taking contracts, civil procedure. I hate it, guys. I hate it. And I'm thinking, why am I doing this and putting myself through these miserable classes? And for those of you thinking about law school, anyone? A few folks? Okay. Law school, they actually grade you on a curve. So let's say you get the equivalent of a B+ on your test. Well, everybody in your class, if they got an A or a B+, you're actually getting basically a D because the curve is going to reflect what your grade is. So you're competing against the other students in your class every day. So it was a highly competitive environment. And I had just come from this amazing year abroad, challenging my faith. And so I just started praying. I said, Lord, I don't want to quit. I know you have a plan for me in this, but can you remind me of why I'm here? And so I started looking for a job while I was in law school that would help me remind me of why I was here. So I looked into a lot of child welfare organizations, and just nothing opened up. And then this opportunity opened up to work at a nonprofit that actually worked on prison conditions. And so I applied to it, thought maybe that'd be interesting, and I ended up getting the job and working my way up the ranks at that small nonprofit while I was in law school. They worked with my schedule, so I could go to classes at night in the summer and sometimes during the day, so I worked part-time, was able to graduate from law school on time and take the bar. But that experience at that nonprofit really opened my eyes to what's going on in this country, which we're going to get into. You've been spending a lot of time talking about some very important issues, vulnerable populations, the talk just now on human trafficking, something that definitely breaks my heart and I hope breaks yours. Criminal justice and justice in America gets even a little bit perhaps more messy, challenges our faith perhaps even more, because I think when we think about child welfare and the most vulnerable among us, we often don't think of people who have committed really terrible choices, people who have committed crimes. And we serve an awesome God. We serve a God who is radical and outrageous in his love and his forgiveness, and he has a plan for those people as well. So God opened my eyes to that, and as I was working at this small nonprofit, I got to interact with Prison Fellowship. And Prison Fellowship is, and if we could play those slides too and get those up in just a moment, that'd be great. Prison Fellowship is the nation's largest Christian nonprofit in the country. And I started interacting with them at my previous nonprofit and felt that it would be wonderful to work at a place that also represented my faith values. And so when an opportunity opened up shortly after I graduated from law school to join the team at Prison Fellowship and work on lobbying on criminal justice reform and doing that from my own faith perspective, I wanted to jump on that. Is it possible to get the PowerPoint slides up that I think are available?
They're working on it.
Okay, great, thank you. So a little bit about Prison Fellowship. We train volunteers in prison. That's actually what we're most known for. We're the largest Christian nonprofit serving people in prison. So many of my colleagues go into prison on a daily basis, and they're meeting with men and women and sharing from a Christian worldview, much like you all are talking about here today. And people are coming to know the hope that is available in Christ. We also care for families of the incarcerated, a program that I actually grew up on that I knew of from Prison Fellowship at my own church is Angel Tree. And we're going to serve over 300,000 children this year through that program who have incarcerated moms or dads. And that program allows a mom or dad who's in prison to sign their child up to receive a Christmas gift on behalf of them with a note from them. And churches help us buy those gifts and deliver them and build relationships with families who are impacted by incarceration. We also equip correctional leaders to make prisons more rehabilitative. And then the part of the organization that I work for, we actually advocate for justice reforms. We've been advancing this mission for over 40 years. Our founder was actually the late Chuck Colson. And when I'm in a room full of people of this age, I don't usually expect too many of you to know who that is. Anyone know who Chuck Colson is? All right, good amount of folks. Well, so for those of you who aren't familiar with him, he was what was known as the hatchet man for President Nixon. And the Watergate scandal, which brought that administration down, actually Chuck Colson was part of that, and he confessed to being part of the Watergate scandal. And he was known as this very brazen man, would do anything to get the president elected, and he ended up confessing to being involved in the Watergate scandal, had a born-again experience with Christ, And he was put into prison for his involvement in the Watergate scandal. And he spent just under a year in federal prison. And he promised the men that he met inside that he wouldn't forget them. And when he got out, he was prompted to start the ministry, and he stayed true to that. I think a lot of the people in the political world at the time didn't think that he would follow through on his promise because of the reputation that he had. But he certainly did, and he actually served with us for all of those years and decades, passed away in 2012. But he went on to write a number of books. Some of you may be familiar with them, and he became very well known in the Christian worldview arena, and grateful to work for his organization. And so as we think about over-incarceration in America, how many of you know someone who, or you yourself have visited a prison or done prison ministry? Know someone who has? A lot of people, great. I was just yesterday in Austin speaking to a church full of people who do prison ministry here in Texas. And I think it's been really encouraging to see in America that prison ministry has become somewhat of a staple for the Christian church. We believe and know that the Bible calls us to visit those in prison, and people live that out. But I think sometimes we are so concerned with bringing the gospel to souls that we also forget that the gospel has something to say to us about its role in systems. The justice system in America has grown at such a rapid pace in the last 6 decades that America holds the title of the world's leading incarcerator. No other country in the world incarcerates more of its citizens than this nation, America. As Christians, we're called to bring the hope of the gospel to those in cells, but have we stopped to ask ourselves about whether those we serve there are there for just cause, or if they're there for a punishment that truly fits the crime? And so I want to give you a sense of the scope of incarceration and the criminal justice system in America. We have about 10.5 million arrests made in a given year, 2.2 million Americans are incarcerated in jail or prison, and another 4.5 million Americans are on probation or parole. And this has a ripple effect. It's not just the people who are in prison, right, that are affected, but it's also their families. We know that 1 in 28 children have a parent who is incarcerated. There might be someone in this room who has an incarcerated parent today. Statistically speaking, there should be many. And that stat goes down to 1 in 9 when we think about African American children. And then there's also a ripple effect once someone gets out of prison. We have been incarcerating so many people at such a pace in this country and solving problems with the criminal justice system that 70 million American adults have a criminal record. That's approximately 1 in 3 American adults. And people have a hard time when I talk about the statistic. They don't really believe it. And I actually now work as a lobbyist. I'm a registered lobbyist. My grandmother has a hard time with that. She prefers just lawyer. But I try and explain to her, you know, Grandma, I'm lobbying for the Lord. It's okay. I was sitting in a senator's office speaking with some staff about this very statistic. And there were several of us there, and one of them said, this can't be true because there's 4 of us in this room, and if that were the case, at least one of us would have a criminal record. And there's a bit of a pause for a moment, and then one of the senator's lawyers said, well, actually I do. And so we really don't even realize the ripple effect of incarceration, and particularly for those of you like myself who've been raised in a suburban community, we may not see it as much, and it may not be talked about as much or felt as much as it is in urban centers and communities of color. And we spend a lot on criminal justice. We spend a lot on what we think of as the solution to crime, $33,000 approximately on average to incarcerate someone. And thinking of you all being here with you today, I want to talk a little bit about the youth justice system. This chart shows the delinquency caseload, those who have youth who have been involved in the system. And the rate for all offenses reached its highest level in the last 2 decades in 1996. And luckily, the caseload for youth has declined. We've been trying some new solutions in the youth system that we haven't put into effect in the adult system, and they have actually been working to use more community-based solutions. And so even though the rate has declined since that high point, nevertheless, the delinquency caseload in 2015 was 1.6 times the caseload in 1960. And so there's almost over 100,000 cases in juvenile court were on the basis of status offenses. And a status offense is something that's only really an offense because of your age. It wouldn't be an offense if you were an adult. Something like skipping out on school or running away or underage drinking. Of those cases, 55% were related to truancy charges, failure to come to school, which can result in ending up in the youth justice system. And so a lot of times what I want to equip Christians with, I love from earlier today, Ryan's t-shirt, less actism, more factism. I want to give you guys some facts as you're thinking about talking about these issues going forward. And I think to be able to successfully talk about why the current justice system and the policies that we put in place in America today aren't working, we have to understand the facts. Because talking about justice and talking about people who have committed crimes can result in some emotional responses, and we have to respond with actually what we know to be true from the data. And so I want to start with a bit of a pop quiz for you guys today. I want you to think from 1960 all the way back to 1960 to today. Do you think that the crime rate, my question is, do you think the crime rate has generally been increasing or generally been decreasing? Okay, from 1960 to today. So show of hands if you think the crime rate has generally been increasing since 1960 to today. Okay, and show of hands now if you think it's generally been decreasing. Okay, so your answers are not uncommon in polling when we ask Americans what they think of the crime rate. In fact, this is a chart showing the crime rate, and as you can see, a vast general decline in crime since 1960. When we ask Americans in Gallup polls, people all believe crime is on the rise. And in fact, Prison Fellowship is releasing its own polling in December, where we specifically try and pull out categories of Christians in particular to get their opinions on different criminal justice issues. And we find practicing Christians are even more likely than the general American to believe this. And as a subcategory of Christians, evangelicals, most likely to believe this. I don't know if it's our source of news or what that's about. But actually, crime has been on the decline. And I think it's also important to know because at that same time as crime has been on the decline, we've actually incarcerated at a rate 165 times more than we did in 1960. So we have just exploded our prison system, but crime has been declining. And so some people might say, well, Heather, perhaps it's because incarceration's working. We've seen a decline in crime because we've incarcerated so many people. And so here's what I want to arm you with if you ever have someone make that argument to you. Even the most bold proponents for people who believe in incarceration as a key solution to crime, and I'm not saying I don't believe in incarceration, I certainly do believe there's a place for incarceration. But I do think it's overused. And what we find is that even the researchers who really put forward that incarceration should be a more prominent solution in America say that approximately 25% of the decline in crime in America is as a result of incarceration. There are many other factors at play. Things like the aging baby boomer population, strategic policing that we've developed over time, the community responses to crime have helped. Also drug market changes. And so all of these things are contributing factors to the crime rate decline. And researchers also find that incarceration may even increase the likelihood of criminal behavior for people. Because if you think about it, when we send people to prison, we actually in America don't really have this expectation that they're going to come back better. Now imagine that for a second. Like if we sent your mom or dad to the hospital with a condition and they came out worse than when they went in, and the hospital said, hey, yeah, we're done with your mom or dad, you would be pretty upset, right? Like you would want to demand, why is this hospital sending my mom or dad or loved one back worse than when they started? But not so with the prison system in America. We send someone to prison and it's almost an expectation that they're going to continue in a life of crime. And part of that is because of the culture of prisons. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the approach that Prison Fellowship has embraced, because we do believe there is a different and better way, one that is laid out in Scripture. And so when we think about what the Bible has to say about responding to crime and incarceration? Well, we know that the Bible tells us that God is just, that justice flows from God's very character. We also know that God is relational and restorative, right? It's about more than a crime committed against the state. It's about broken relationships, the harm that is caused to victims of crime, as well as the community. And in Genesis 1:27, we read that God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. This image of Imago Dei is something we should anchor ourselves to as we pursue justice. And so if we really believe in Imago Dei, that we're all made in the image of God, we're all worthy of protection and care and respect. That's true for the unborn, right? As we were talking about earlier, it's true for the victim of human trafficking, the victim of any crime, but it's also true for the person responsible for crime. And so at Prison Fellowship, because of that belief in Imago Dei extending to everyone, even those who have made some really poor choices, we want to advocate for a justice system that actually recognizes human dignity in all of those parties. We want to prioritize victim participation. We believe victims could have a lot more say in the system than they do today, that they are deserving of a lot more care and healing than they do today. We believe in cultivating community engagement. So often crime and prisons are out of sight and out of mind, but they shouldn't be. We should be part of this, especially as the body of Christ. And when it comes to those who are responsible for crime, we want to promote proportional punishment. We want to hold people accountable in a way that truly fits the crime, as the Bible lays out over and over again, this notion of proportionality. We want to have a constructive prison culture where people don't come home worse, but they actually come home transformed. And we want closure for people who have paid their debt. We'll get into this a little bit more, but so often people go to prison and a judge tells them what they have to do, but that punishment doesn't end at the end of their sentence. There's a lot that carries with them. And so I want to show you a few examples of the types of stories of how the justice system is impacting people and the corresponding reforms that we try to tackle. And so for starters, I want to talk about Adriana. Adriana was actually featured in the New York Times a few years back. She escaped an abusive boyfriend. She was living in a women's shelter with her baby. And she asked a friend at the shelter to watch her daughter while she ran to get some diapers from the store. A staff member at the shelter saw her leaving without her daughter, and she was after curfew, and so they called the police. And again, I think goes to this default response we have in America of calling police and also thinking that every problem can be solved by incarceration or jail. But upon returning with the diapers, Adriana was arrested and charged with endangering the welfare of her child. Before her arraignment or coming before the judge for her first courtroom appearance, the public defender was unable to track down the friend who had been watching her daughter. In court, nobody could confirm that her daughter hadn't been left unsupervised. And so although Adriana had no criminal history, the judge set her bond at $1,500. This is a woman who's living in a shelter. The prosecutor actually suggested $5,000, so she was, I guess, getting a break at $1,500. She had no way to pay. And because of that, she spent weeks waiting in jail until her attorney was able to move the case to a different judge and finally get the bail removed. By that time, Adriana had lost her bed at the shelter, and her daughter was placed in foster care. And so when we think about the story of Adriana, what are some of the issues at play here? I think about the issue of a just process. Did this woman receive the defense that she deserved? Was she able to truly make a case, or because of her poverty, something God cares deeply about in the Bible, was she put at a disadvantage? Was the response to what she did proportional? Is jail and incarceration necessary for the facts at play? And when we think about poverty and the justice system, people are treated very differently and have very different outcomes. We see again and again in the data, depending on the means that you have and the ability you have to solicit counsel. And so when we think about solutions in this case, there's actually a number of states, thankfully, who are rethinking how we do bail, because bail is so often based on your means and ability to pay to get out of jail. And mind you, when Adriana is sitting in jail, she has not yet been confirmed guilty. There are people all over this country today who are sitting in jail awaiting their court date, and they're not convicted yet. So technically, of course, in America, we're supposed to say guilty or innocent until proven guilty, right? But often we treat folks in the reverse. And so a number of states are, though, rethinking bail reform, and they're actually moving towards a system where they're no longer using cash bail. They're using risk assessments to assess, okay, what are the facts of the case? Does this person have criminal history? And if they're a low risk to society, they can be released and expected to come back for their court date, and if they're convicted, punished at that time. And so more and more states are trying to use risk assessments and other things that don't make it dependent whether or not you get to go home based on your income levels. This is Caleb. Caleb's 11 years old. He's diagnosed as autistic. His teacher called the school resource officer after he failed to properly line up. And when the officer grabbed him around the chest, Caleb struggled, and he struck the officer with his arm. He was charged with a felony assault and battery on a law enforcement officer. His story ran in the Virginia papers, which is where I grew up. And so when I think about the issues in this case and how this little boy was pushed further and further into the justice system, and some of the things that arise in his case are actually very prevalent all over America and in our adult systems as well. When we think about people with a disability or people with mental health issues, oftentimes those things arise and show themselves, and people respond in a way that does not recognize that this is actually a symptom of those issues, not a criminal behavior. And so we have lots of people all over this country who are sitting in jail and suffering severe mental illness because we don't have the services in the community to respond in any other way. And then another policy issue we've been tackling that I wanted to bring up while we're here in Texas is, do you know in Texas what age you are considered an adult by the criminal justice system? 17, right. So one of the few states left, you can see the states up here, most of America treats 18-year-olds automatically as adults in the justice system. In Texas, we're still at 17. This is something Prison Fellowship has been fighting. We believe that the juvenile system is much better equipped to respond with accountability measures and wraparound services that can help youth. But in Texas, no matter what crime you commit, how serious or how minor, you're automatically treated as adults. And so this is something we're working to change, and there are a number of states lately who have been moving towards this direction, which has been promising. And so we hope that Texas will get there soon as well. And there's also more of a movement in the youth justice system to move away from the reliance on large, out-of-date prison facilities and increase the use of regional correctional homes for youth who really do need that secure care. I want to talk about second chances as well. This guy here, Robbie, actually graduated from a prison fellowship program in prison. He was doing super well. He actually got out, found a job. An employer took a chance on him, and he did super well, and they ended up hiring even more people with criminal records. Robbie got married. He has several kids, and 15 years after his offense, and being out of home from prison and doing well, he actually was denied the ability to volunteer in his son's class when they found out about his criminal record. And so Robbie pushed this all the way up with the school and said, that's not who I am anymore. I've paid my whole debt. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a taxpayer, and I think after 15 years of proving myself, I should actually be able to volunteer in my son's class, which he ended up being able to do. But he said out of all of the barriers he faced on behalf of his criminal record, that stigma in this context with his son was one of the hardest for him. And we actually asked in some polling if the general idea of getting a second chance is something most Americans really believe in. 93% agree that someone who's completed their just punishment should have the opportunity to be a productive member of society. But when we actually dig in a little bit deeper and ask Americans how that can apply in specific policy situations, we ask about restrictions placed on people for voting, as well as housing or employment. Well, then Americans' agreement, and Christians in particular, that support declines when we start getting into the specifics. So we support a second chance. We have a God of second chances, right? But I'm not so sure about about applying that second chance when we get into the specifics of it. And so that's something we're really trying to fight at Prison Fellowship. We do work to restore voting rights for people who have a criminal record, especially because there's no connection to public safety for whether or not someone's able to vote. We try and address that cultural stigma that comes with having a criminal record. And then we're also working to address employment barriers and licensing barriers for people with a criminal record so that they're able to work at their God-given potential. And so I want to give you all some practical ideas today of how you can think about responding to this issue of crime and over-incarceration in America. The first one is really simple. You can start doing it today. It has to do with labels and language. And I'm a big believer that language and labels change culture. When we call people ex-con or felon, it puts us into an us or them category. And it also implies that that is actually that person's identity. If you think about some cultural movements in America, for example, people with disabilities. I now say people with disabilities. I don't use another term that labels them as that is the only facet of who they are, right? And when we think about our viewpoint on this as Christians, first and foremost, we're children of God, right? And so if someone's made a terrible choice, they're first and foremost still a person. And so we try at Prison Fellowship to use language like person with a criminal record or men and women who are incarcerated and really put forward that human dignity piece first. So that's something I'd encourage you to think about. You can get involved in social media. Prison Fellowship has some Facebook account, a Twitter account at Justice Reform where you can kind of track what's going on and respond to it, post about these issues and about the other issues you've been hearing about. I think social media can be a powerful tool for good or not so much good, and so I encourage you to use it for good. We also have something called the Justice Declaration. You can go to justicedeclaration.org. And read it. It's a call to the church to respond to crime and incarceration through both prison ministry as well as justice reform. And there's a number of prominent Christian leaders who have signed it. And we invite anyone who believes in the principles laid out there to sign it online at justicedeclaration.org. When you do that, you'll actually get added to Prison Fellowship's advocate alerts. And so if you're someone who wants to get involved in advocacy and know what's going on with the laws around this country, we'll send you updates about what's happening in Texas and at the federal level. And we'll actually give you an advocate tool that will allow you to advocate and talk to your members of Congress in just a few clicks. And so we try and make advocacy as easy and non-daunting as possible. And we also have a program called Justice Ambassadors. Some of our most elite advocates actually apply to this program, and they say, not only do I want to send an email or make a call to my legislator every now and again, I really want to do more. And so those who apply to our ambassador program actually volunteer their time to hold events at their church and raise cultural awareness, because I believe changing the law starts with changing the culture. And then they also get equipped on how do you actually have a meeting with your legislator? How do you convey your points? How do you tell your story and share with compelling facts and stories why the system should change? And so we've got hundreds of justice ambassadors across the country who are part of this. And you can go to Prison Fellowship's website, prisonfellowship.org, click volunteer, and you can find resources to volunteer in prison as well as in the ambassador program if you're interested. Another practical idea you can find in your program booklets from today. On page 12, some more information in the website for Outrageous Justice, which is the video we heard at the beginning. We have this multimedia curriculum. It's 6 lessons. You can get together with a small group and continue these conversations and really unpack scripture and stories and data together and wrestle together and have a conversation about this using the Outrageous Justice curriculum. It starts with videos, teaching videos, and they also have testimonials in there. There's a study guide you can kind of walk through that's very easy to do. So I'd really encourage you to check out that resource as well. And then Second Chance Month. For the last several years, Prison Fellowship has been celebrating April as Second Chance Month. And when we started this a few years ago, I can remember our marketing team saying, "Can we just do that? Can we claim a month?" And I said, "Well, we are going to try." And luckily, we were successful in sort of building off of that. We got the U.S. Senate to pass a resolution declaring April a Second Chance Month. The president has actually done a proclamation the last 2 years. The governor of Texas and governors around the country have done their own proclamations. And the whole idea behind this is to raise awareness about the 44,000 legal barriers that are placed on people because they have a criminal record, denying them access to jobs, to employment, to housing, and just the general stigma that comes with the fact that you have a criminal record. And we're trying to unlock second chances through that. So I'd encourage you to think about celebrating in some way Second Chance Month. We have a whole social media toolkit available on our website that you can use. We've had people host prayer walks where they have people sharing stories of second chances, overcoming challenges, or struggling through challenges. And then we have responses in prayer. So there's a whole guidebook for that. There's also a church toolkit if your church is interested in hosting a Second Chance Sunday. So that's something I'd also encourage you to take a look at. So these are just a few practical ideas to put your faith into action. And I would just ask if we could bow our heads, and I'll close us in prayer. Lord, we know the gospel calls us to bring the good news to every man. And it also calls us to seek justice for every man. May we be people who seek justice for souls, yes, but also for systems. Let our hearts break for broken people and for the brokenness in our schools, our neighborhoods, our courtrooms, and our capitals. Lord, would you lift up this student body, Lord? Would you make them people who seek justice, men and women who seek justice? Would you let justice roll like a river, Lord, and righteousness like a never-failing stream? Amen. Thank you.